For years, Donald Trump has stood on giant stages across the United States, thundering to his supporters that America is being ripped off by its allies, especially Canada. He promised a new era where the U.S. wouldn't depend on anyone. Not for steel, not for aluminum, not for cars, not for anything. The message was simple: America first, the world second. But something happened behind the scenes that completely shatters that narrative. Something his administration was never planning for the public to see. Because while Trump was telling the world he didn't need Canada, one of the most powerful agencies in his own government quietly picked up the phone, called Ontario, and said something no one expected. "We need your help, and we need it fast." It wasn't a small request. It wasn't a backup option. It was a desperate, urgent procurement for military-grade armored vehicles. Vehicles built for war zones, not immigration patrols. And this extremely sensitive deal unfolded right in the middle of the trade war he himself ignited. But that's only the first part of this story. At the same time the U.S. was quietly depending on Canada for battlefield-ready machinery, Trump began something unprecedented on home soil. Massive troop deployments inside American cities. Thousands of National Guard soldiers. Federalized police forces. Armored convoys rolling through the streets of Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, and Memphis. And when you place these events side by side, the Canadian armored truck deal, the escalating militarization, the legal battles, the speed, the secrecy, the picture that emerges is darker than anyone expected. Because the real question isn't why the U.S. was buying Canadian war trucks. The real question is why they needed them so urgently, and what the administration was preparing for next. And as you'll see, once the pieces line up, the contradictions become impossible to ignore. The story begins with a single leaked document, an internal procurement memo from ICE, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In it, the agency quietly approved a $7.2 million emergency deal to buy 20 armored tactical vehicles from Rochelle, an Ontario-based defense manufacturer. The timing? Right when Trump had doubled steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada to 50%. The optics? Terrible. The justification? Even worse. Because buried inside the memo is a remarkable admission. After conducting market research across multiple American and international vendors, ICE concluded that only one company on the planet could deliver the exact vehicles they needed, in the exact quantity they demanded, within the extremely tight deadline they set. And that company was not American. It was Rochelle of Brampton, Ontario. ICE specifically wrote that American suppliers lacked inventory, couldn't match the protection levels, or required too much time, some needing 180 days or more. ICE, however, wanted all 20 armored vehicles delivered within 30 days. And Rochelle said yes. That alone raises questions. Why does a U.S. federal agency need mine-resistant, battlefield-certified vehicles delivered at breakneck speed? Why was there no domestic company ready to meet those needs? And why did this procurement happen quietly, almost secretly, during a heated trade war? Rumors suggest that the leak originated from inside ICE itself, possibly from staff who were stunned by the hypocrisy of telling the world America doesn't need Canada, while relying heavily on Canadian engineering for critical missions. Whatever the source, the memo makes one thing clear: the U.S. was depending on Canada at the exact moment it claimed it wouldn't. And that's where the story takes a sharp turn. Because when you look at what Rochelle actually builds, the urgency becomes even harder to ignore. If you've never heard of the Rochelle Senator, you're not alone. It's not something you see every day. It's not a patrol vehicle. It's not a police van. This thing is closer to a rolling bunker than anything used in regular American law enforcement. The Senator platform is built on a Ford F-Series chassis, but everything from the body to the interior is transformed into a weaponized fortress. We're talking ballistic protection certified to NATO's STANAG 4569 Level 2, meaning it can absorb armor-piercing 7.62 millimeter rounds. We're talking Level 2A/2B blast protection, capable of surviving mine-level explosions. We're talking gun ports, reinforced bumpers, roof hatches, and a configuration that lets a tactical team breach barricades or push through hostile terrain. This isn't the kind of truck you use to stop a speeding car or patrol a neighborhood. This is the kind you deploy in war. Rochelle has produced more than 1,700 of these armored beasts for the war in Ukraine. They've rolled across artillery zones, survived drone strikes, and crawled through roads filled with IEDs. And now, ICE. The agency responsible for immigration enforcement inside the United States wanted a mini-fleet of them for rapid domestic deployment. Critics have begun asking what kind of immigration enforcement requires mine-resistant vehicles. Why would ICE need something designed to withstand battlefield explosions? Who exactly are they preparing to confront? Protesters? Migrant caravans? Organized criminal groups? Or something else entirely? No one in the administration has given a clear answer. But the fact that the same vehicles used in a live war are now being purchased for U.S. soil has sparked speculation that goes far beyond simple procurement. And as it turns out, this wasn't Rochelle's first U.S. deal. Weeks before the ICE contract surfaced, Rochelle publicly confirmed something quietly overlooked in the news cycle. It had delivered another one of its Senator armored vehicles to a U.S. agency in Guam, one of the most strategically important American territories in the Asia-Pacific region. Guam is a military hub, an increasingly tense zone in the U.S.-China rivalry. When a Canadian armored vehicle is delivered to such a sensitive region, eyebrows go up. Analysts wondered if the U.S. military and law enforcement agencies were relying on Rochelle more heavily than expected. This pattern, Guam, then ICE, suggests U.S. agencies had been turning to Canada for high-risk missions consistently, despite the Buy American rhetoric dominating political speeches. Behind the scenes, when the stakes were high, when the safety requirements were extreme, when the demands were urgent, the U.S. quietly chose Canada. That choice is even more ironic when you remember the chaos happening at the trade level. The tariff war was supposed to send a message. It was supposed to tell the world that America would rebuild its own supply chains and manufacture its own steel, aluminum, and industrial components. Canada, Europe, China, everyone would have to fall in line. Instead, the opposite happened. Trump's 25% tariff on imported metals, followed by a sweeping increase to 50%, sent shockwaves through global markets. Canada retaliated with billions of dollars in counter-tariffs. European leaders blasted Washington. Domestic prices for building materials skyrocketed. Small businesses and manufacturers struggled to keep up with the sudden cost hikes. Even worse, Canadian consumers launched a massive informal boycott of American products, refusing to buy U.S. goods as a form of protest. American exporters felt the impact almost immediately. But while the public was watching this trade war erupt on TV, something very different was happening behind closed doors. U.S. agencies were quietly admitting they still needed Canada. Not for convenience, but for capability, for expertise, for technology, for speed. America first on the stage, Canada first behind the scenes. That contradiction becomes even more alarming when you look at what Trump began doing domestically. Because around the exact same time ICE was begging Canada for armored trucks, the administration started turning the U.S. into something the country had never seen. January marked a major shift. Trump deployed thousands of active-duty soldiers and Marines to the southern border, not for engineering support or humanitarian tasks, but for direct involvement in detentions. For the first time in modern history, U.S. troops were positioned to physically assist in blocking migrants and enforcing border crackdowns. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't for show. It was operational. Military aircraft were used for deportations. Troops built checkpoints and fortified areas near border towns. Over 8,500 personnel were placed across the region. These weren't traditional border missions. These were tactical deployments, pushing the boundary of what federal law typically allows.
This alone would have been controversial. But then something happened that no one saw coming. Trump began sending troops into America's biggest cities. And once that line was crossed, everything escalated.
It started in Los Angeles. After protests erupted over immigration raids, Trump deployed 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines to the city. Streets were filled with soldiers wearing full tactical gear. Armored vehicles appeared in neighborhoods that had never seen anything like it. Once the protests faded, most troops left, but the precedent remained. Then came Washington, D.C. Trump didn't just deploy troops. He took direct federal control of the Metropolitan Police Department, claiming the city had been overtaken by roving mobs and violent criminals. But the Justice Department's own data revealed violent crime was at a 30-year low. Yet 2,200 National Guard soldiers stayed on the streets. When a gunman killed a soldier in the city, Trump used the incident to escalate even further. Suddenly, every Guard member in D.C. was armed and authorized to patrol. Residents described it as a military occupation. The next targets? Memphis, Chicago, Portland. Memphis saw a coordinated multi-agency force combining the FBI, federal task forces, and National Guard units. Portland became a constitutional battlefield. The governor opposed the deployment. A judge blocked it. Trump tried to bypass the order by flying in National Guard troops from California. Another judge intervened. Another restraining order. Another legal fight. Chicago followed the same pattern. More troops, more clashes with state leaders, and another major legal battle. Everywhere the same themes appeared. Cities pushed back. Courts resisted. The administration kept going anyway. And then came the moment that connected everything. In normal circumstances, a federal judge blocking a troop deployment is the end of the story. Orders get reversed. Troops go home. But during these months, something different happened. Even when courts intervened, federal deployments continued appearing through loopholes, jurisdictional maneuvers, and alternative authorizations. Legal scholars described it as a constitutional gray zone, a space no administration had used so aggressively before. Rumors began circulating among policy analysts that internal disagreements were growing between federal agencies and state governments over how far the administration was willing to stretch its authority. And that brings us back to the armored vehicles. Because at the exact moment the administration was escalating domestic military presence, ICE was scrambling to obtain 20 mine-resistant Canadian armored vehicles at lightning speed. When you place these events side by side, a chilling narrative emerges. The U.S. wasn't just buying armored trucks. It was preparing for something. Something fast, something domestic, and something it didn't want to talk about. Which leads us to the final, uncomfortable question. Trump's public message was simple. America stands alone. America builds its own. America needs no one. But the truth hiding in procurement files tells a different story. When the stakes are low, slogans are enough. But when the stakes are high, when protection, speed, and survival are on the line, the U.S. turned to Canada. That's not a small contradiction. That's a revelation. Because you don't seek out battlefield-certified armored vehicles on 30-day delivery timelines unless something urgent is happening. You don't militarize major American cities unless you're preparing for mass unrest or destabilizing events. You don't federalize police departments and override governors unless the administration believes something bigger is coming. So what was the U.S. preparing for? Was it political unrest? Mass protests? Internal breakdowns? Some analysts say this was preparation for worst-case scenarios. Others think it was about testing the limits of presidential authority. And still others believe the administration was simply trying to reshape America's internal power structure. Whatever the truth is, the facts speak for themselves. Trump said America didn't need Canada, yet his government begged Canada for armored war trucks. Trump said America was safe, yet his government filled its cities with troops. Two stories, one reality. America first in public, foreign hardware and unprecedented militarization in practice. And if this is how far the administration went in a time of relative peace, the real question is not why it happened, but what they were getting ready for next.